Welcome to Suncoast In Depth Podcast. I'm here with Ricardo Aviles. I'm Brett Watson, and we're talking about, or continuing to talk about the book, The Universal Christ by Richard Rohr. We're on chapter 3 now. And so you haven't been here
for not.
These.
No.
And
I've heard you talk a lot about this book.
Yeah.
And
you still haven't read it.
I still haven't read it. I'm sorry.
Thanks.
But it sounds, I love Rohr. I love a lot of his work. I've read a lot of his work, and I think this book is definitely, and now even just prepping for this class, I definitely will get into it. So
yeah, it's good. Highly recommend it.
So give me just like a brief summary
Okay.
so far of what you guys have covered.
Yeah, so the book in general is Rohr expanding on the concept of logos. So logos is unfortunately translated as word in the Bible, not a very good translation. But you see it most prominently, and most Christians know about it from John's Gospel in the prologue, where John says, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." That word is logos. And then he goes on to say that this logos is the person through which everything came into being, right? And then you see in Paul's writings where he seems to use Christ, the title Christ, synonymously with logos. And so this isn't an original idea on Richard's part. What he's so good at is he's good at expanding these theological concepts in ways that just haven't, maybe you could say human consciousness wasn't ready for in previous generations, but it was always there.
Yeah.
And so that's what this book does. It breaks down this idea that Christ is interchangeable with logos. It's the same. It's referring to the same. For a Trinitarian theologian, the same second person of the Trinity.
Now, when you say Christ, do you mean Jesus as the person Jesus, or do you mean the Spirit of Christ? What are you referring to when you say that?
That's a good question. Yes and no.
Okay.
So the way that the Bible presents this, the New Testament presents this, is that the Christ, the Logos, is the thing through which everything came into being. So everywhere you look then, when you look at this table, when you look at your pet, when you look at the bug on your windshield, in a sense, you're looking at the Christ, the Logos, because everything comes into being. So it's I like to say, maybe I'm wrong about this, so someone would have to correct me, but the Logos, the Christ, is the physical manifestation of the eternal God in physical reality.
Yeah, because I've heard Larry say things like, Jesus was so full of the Spirit of Christ that he was the example that was set for us.
Yes.
So that's why I wanted that clarification as far as like what you mean by Christ.
Yes. So Jesus is the Christ. He's a manifestation of the Christ. And he's a unique manifestation of the Christ, I think.
Right.
There's a greater awareness in Jesus of Nazareth of his connectedness than there is in the typical human being.
Right.
So I do embrace that orthodox idea, you know, that Jesus is the unique manifestation of the Logos.
Yeah, I would agree with that as well. No, it's so this specific chapter. Let's get into this. So it's chapter 3, and we kind of read through some of the stuff that you prepped me with, and so it talks about salvation. So my background, and probably most people that grew up in church, salvation was a singular event that took place when you accepted. You said the sinner's prayer. You accepted Christ into your heart, and depending on which faction of Christianity you were in, you were set.
Yes.
For the rest of your life, no matter what you did.
Depending on which branch.
So, but that was at least my my upbringing. Was
Yeah.
once you said the sinner's prayer, you accepted Christ into your heart, you were set. That was so salvation was like I said, a very singular event. So it seems like Rohr is expanding on that idea to not being that way in this chapter.
Right.
So it's more of what?
It's more of a corporate reality. So it's not when we hyper individualize salvation the way that we have in our kind of evolution, our spiritual evolution. You can see why that happens. We have been a hyper individualistic culture, right? So it makes sense that popular American Christianity would go that route. But again, here's another example where the Bible doesn't really inform us that way. It's not that individual salvation isn't a thing, but it's a thing within another thing. It's a piece of that.
Expand on that.
Okay, so you are a human being. You are unique as a creature on this planet. You're way more aware. You're so conscious that you are self-aware. So if I had my dog Oliver sitting here and we could somehow read his mind, I doubt seriously that he's ever thinking about the day he's going to die or the fact that he's going to die, right? But you do have those thoughts. So you have this self-awareness and this awareness that you have a beginning and an end as you currently are.
Or even just things like purpose. Like, what is my purpose in this life? What are the things
you
that I'm...
infuse meaning into things. And
Correct.
Exactly. Yeah, Oliver doesn't do that. He's
At least not that we know of.
Not that we can tell anyway, yeah.
There is a survival instinct that most things have.
Yeah, and humans are really weird that way, right? Because of our expanded consciousness, we actually find ourselves at odds with that survival nature.
Right.
And doing things that we deem meaningful or moral, that seems to fly in the face of animal instinct.
But that could be the response to why there is such an individualism to salvation.
Yes.
It could be a survival instinct, like I need to protect myself above all else.
Yeah, possibly.
Yeah.
But the thing is, when a young strapping fireman, I use this example a lot, runs into a burning building to save a 99-year-old woman that probably is in the last 2 weeks of her life, instead of letting her die in there. That is not what most animals would do.
Correct. Yeah.
And so that's a strange quality that human beings possess. And many theologians would say that's at least in part what is meant by Genesis saying that we are made in the image of God. So we kind of transcend our animal nature, but we are commingled with it. So there's this conflict taking place.
Yeah. What do they call it? The lizard brain that lives inside of all of us.
Yes. Yeah. The different layers of the brain, right? The lizard brain, the monkey brain, and then the human brain on top. So we contend with all that. So that makes us weird, right? I got off on that.
So
explaining
it's starting with salvation. So
individualistic salvation.
So individual. We say the sinner's prayer.
Yes, right.
You know, and then we go through that, and then we're good. We're in the club. We're in the team. We're good for the rest for eternity.
Yeah. When the Bible talks about salvation, it's not that it never addresses the idea of an individual coming into an awareness of this connection that they have with God through the Logos or through Christ, right? Peter talks about that in his letters, and Paul certainly talks about that. So they address that individual idea, but it's
even
only
Jesus,
individual.
Isn't there the line, pick up your cross and follow me? What is that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Jesus said that.
Yeah. So, that's an individual statement. It didn't say like, let's all pick up this cross and follow. He said, he identifies that at least the fact that there will be an individual responsibility in this life.
Yeah, none of that goes away.
No.
It's just that, again, Rohr is expanding our understanding of the biblical concept of salvation, which is actually linked to his whole, really the Bible's presentation of being itself. So if the Logos or the Christ is the singularity. And remember, those are just labels, right? Those are just human words that we put on this esoteric reality, right? This mystery. And the reason I say that is I don't want to turn anybody off if they're not Christian. You know what I'm saying? It doesn't really end up mattering. And that is a biblical notion that I'm stating there. Paul says, for example, that those who do not possess the law can become the law themselves.
So what does he mean by that?
He means that he's referring to this interconnectedness that we all have, or if you want to use a psychological term, Jung called it the collective unconscious.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So we're all interconnected, like it or not.
Yeah.
If it's true that things began with a singularity. So even physicists will say that.
Yeah.
That's the Big Bang, right? So if there's this divine singularity, the Logos, then we're all interconnected. So his idea, I keep saying his, but the biblical notion of salvation is more about an awakening of this individual, Ricardo, to the reality that has always been. So another way of putting this, Rohr says, you have never been separated from God, nor can you be, except in your mind. And if you think that's unbiblical, then I would say look at Colossians 1, where Paul says, you were at one time enemies with God in your minds. So the Bible, Rohr, is pointing this out, that salvation is really more about an awakening to what reality has always been, which is this interconnectedness.
Yeah.
Now, that doesn't mean that, and I always feel like I have to point this out because I'm trying to take it to its logical ends that I think people might take it to.
Okay.
Well, then why did you ever change the reality to begin with? Why are we in this? Why this? You know, why do we have this fallen nature and this delusional mind that keeps us from being aware of this reality, or something that we have to work into, right? I think that's a question that at least some people are going to end up asking when you state things like this. And I think it's a good question to ask. But I think a good answer for it, C.S. Lewis put it this way. He said that there must be something better about a fallen and redeemed creation than a creation that never fell to begin with. So there's something new being made in the process of this awakening.
Yeah. No, I think that's beautifully said, because obviously nobody enjoys suffering. Nobody enjoys not being aware of certain things, right? Like, it's just like, how many times have you said, oh man, I wish I would have known this earlier? You know, it's like, that's something that
somebody said just this morning in the office, hindsight's 20/20.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, but there is something to that mountaintop experience that, you know, Leighton and I went on a hill sprint run, and I, you know, I'm starting to work with her on just like endurance and pushing yourself and pushing through when things hurt and keep going, because that mountaintop experience is very, very surreal and fun and amazing.
And in that case, you're actually you're inviting adversity. You're creating the adversity.
Correct, because you know, we live a very cushy life. Like, you know, life is very easy and very good for us. And so, as her father, you know, my natural instinct is for her to never suffer and for her to never go through any pain. But I know in those moments of pain and suffering, that is making her stronger. So when we're running up this hill and she's telling me like, Daddy, my legs hurt, I'm almost out of breath, like all these different things, like as a father, your instinct is like, okay, stop. But I know that she can do it. I know she can push through. And so I'm right behind her. I'm with her the whole time, but I'm not doing it for her. And I'm saying, keep going. You got this. I know it hurts, but you got this. Because I know at the end, when she gets to the top of that mountain, she's going to A, learn a lesson, and B, have this extreme high of accomplishment and success and knowing like, I did it, I overcame it.
Yeah.
And so that could be this idea. You could relate that just to this idea as well of salvation. Like, yes, it sucks to go through the suffering, but man, when your reality and your eyes are open to this new thing, this experience.
Such a great analogy.
Yeah, but it works. Like it is amazing. And I think that's really good on your part, just as far as like, you have to go through, that's just thinking, going through the process of like, okay, this is the idea. What is the most logical response or bounce back to this idea? So even presenting it that way, I think is very good.
Yeah, it's a, but your analogy is just so good. We're not talking about suffering and love, but he does do that in this chapter.
Yeah.
He, for example, he says, do we really think that Cro-Magnon man or Neanderthals or you name it, there's a whole bunch of different Homo species, right? Do we really think that they were just they were throwaways or a dress rehearsal for us? And that only those who have heard of Jesus and gone to the altar and said a prayer and made some kind of mental assent, conscious assent to the ideas of Jesus, are saved? Do we really think that all those people were just throwaways? Is God really that uninteresting, stingy? Is his model of love based on a scarcity model?
Yeah. But that's the hard part about thinking. Because it's like you have to jump into these things, especially within theology and the universe and God and this idea of the Christ. Like, it's really hard when you start thinking, and I think that's why a lot of people run away from it, because
it literally burns more calories.
It does, but it's just like it's so difficult to wrap your head around some of these concepts, and then you're left with no answers. Yeah. And I think that's what pushes people away. Yeah, it's what pushes people away from actually diving into these concepts. So if you had to summarize, because I know we got to end this soon, if you had to summarize kind of what you felt like was the point and the aha moment of this chapter, what would you say?
So individual salvation is a real thing. So if you did go to the altar and cry, or you do look back at your baptism and you claim that, if you're Roman Catholic, as your point of salvation, that's fine.
You're not trying to minimize that.
I'm not really, no. And I don't think Roar is either. But the difference is the paradigm shift that we see happening in human consciousness really is as we awaken to more of what has always been real, is that it's an opportunity. You have this ongoing opportunity to awaken to that reality and then be able to see Christ in everything, to see that everything is in union. Even the bad stuff is in union with this wider reality that we call God. I think that's the big takeaway in this chapter. And so salvation, is it universal salvation? Yeah. Eventually.
Yeah.
You may go through hell to get there, but yeah, that seems to be the biblical message.
And even just going back to that one word of salvation, what does that mean? Like, if you're speaking to somebody that's an atheist, like, what am I getting saved from? What does this word salvation mean?
Right. And really, I think when you look at the whole of biblical counsel there, so just forget Rory for a second. When you look at the whole of it and you ask that question, I think the answer that it gives is you're being saved from this delusion. So is it salvation technically that way? Well, just depends. It gets into semantics, doesn't it? But so that's why I said earlier that salvation is really more of an awakening. So yeah, is that something to be saved from and all the hell that delusion can create? Think of the psychological benefit of learning and embracing, really truly embracing this notion that I have always been accepted. I have always been loved by virtue of the fact that I am in God. I am in Christ. We could have helped the world so much more if we had run with that idea instead of doing things like trying to prove that Jesus is God. In fact, that's a quote from Rohr.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. No, I mean, it definitely seems like we're spending a lot of time arguing different theological points that we can't prove.
That don't really change anything, don't really demand anything of us.
Right.
You know, these belief systems that don't require any transformation. It's all just hiding from the transformative reality that is so much better.
So to this awakening to Christ's love that's always there, has always been
already,
there.
as Troy says.
Yeah. I love that.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah. Well, thanks for doing this.
Absolutely, man. It's my honor. I love doing these with you.
All right.